Welcome back to the Tool Crib. Today we're going to be looking at a long-time retired multi-tool. This is the Leatherman Kick. It was first introduced in 2004 and it was retired in 2012, so it's been out of commission now for going on 9 years. This was kind of the successor to the PST and the PST II, the two original Leatherman multi-tools. Well, I guess the PST was the original and the PST II came along a few years later. Now, this came out with a bunch of other models at the same time. The Kick, the Fuse, the Blast, the Core. They were all kind of introduced around that same time frame in 2004. And they did some things that were a little different than what their predecessors were, those being the PST, the PST2, and in the case of the Core, the original Super Tool. So they had some upgrades in certain areas, but then they took away some tooling in others. And the Kick was kind of the entry-level multi-tool, if you will, at the time at Leatherman. There was a couple of other smaller but multi-tools, but when we're talking about the full-size multi-tools, which this one was considered to be a full-size multi-tool, this was basically the entry-level of those models. So let's get into the specs of the weights and the measurements of this Kick, and then we'll talk about the tools, and then we'll bring in the original PST to kind of show you some of the things that changed between that model and this entry-level Kick. One of the great things about the Kick was its size. It was really pretty much on par with the original PST. It was a little bit wider, but all in all, it was a very slim profiled multi-tool. So the weight on this one was 5.36 ounces, which was pretty lightweight, or about 151 grams. It was a 4-inch frame size, so 4 inches in overall length, or about 101 millimeters. It was about 1.25 inches wide at its widest point here, and that translates to about 32 millimeters. And the great thing about this particular tool is how thin it is. It's actually only 1/2 inch thick, or about 13 millimeters, which made it very pocket friendly. And one thing of note is this is one of the only models that I can ever remember having this. They have a special fastener that they use for the tools down here at the bottom that integrated or accepted a pocket clip that you could purchase from Leatherman for this tool. Now I don't have that old pocket clip, but you definitely had the ability to add on a pocket clip to the Kick, and that is one of the things that made it appealing. Well, let's get into all of the tools. Starting with the pliers, this was one of the things that did improve over the original PST and the PST2. The plier size increased substantially between those early versions and this one, and that was one of the things that was appealing about the Kick, Fuse, Blast lineup. So you had your needle nose, which came down to a very, very nice point on there, and then you had your regular pliers, wire cutters, and hard wire cutters, which worked really exceptionally well. Now, one thing that got changed, and the biggest thing about the Kick, Fuse, Blast, and Core line was the fact that they included Zytel inserts. Those Zytel inserts made the ergonomics of this style of multi-tool, where all the tools are on the interior of the tool, made it much more comfortable than those original versions. And that was one of the biggest upgrades, if you will, over the original series of tools. We'll start on this side for the knife blade, if I can find where the nail nick is. It's been a long time since I handled this one, actually. Ah, it's right here. It's really close to that Zytel. I didn't see it. So the first is the knife blade. Now, one thing to note is, much like the PST and the PST2, these blades, or these implements, do not have a locking feature, but rather they have a pretty robust slip joint. So they don't lock in, but they do maintain a very nice slip joint, and so it's not as if they would close up that hard or that easily on you. So the first was a 2¼ inch 428C knife blade, which was a decent length. I actually like my blades to be just a little bit longer, and I think they probably could have got away with getting about another 1/4 inch in here on that blade to have a little bit of the handle, or a little bit left in spacing. So if they wanted to increase that, they certainly could have. The next tool is your 1/4 inch driver, which also works as a light duty pry tool. and then you had an 1/8 inch extended reach driver as well. The last tool on here was not really a tool, is you have your lanyard loop. This is probably the one that I disagreed with, because they had enough spacing in here where they could have added another tool had they wanted to. But this is what they elected to put in there, which is kind of what made the Kick a little cheaper than some of the other models. Now the next tool is something that has become kind of staple tool within Leatherman since its time. This was when they introduced the wire stripper into the combination can opener bottle cap lifter. This was definitely an improvement over the original. This is a much better can opener, just works better the way it's cut, you know, the cut edge here, and then by adding in the wire stripper gave it a lot more functionality for that particular implement. The last tool was where they really improved though. While the original PST and the PST II had a full dimensional Phillips, they didn't include this truss style. Well, what this truss style allowed you to do was to increase your capability, because then you could get the separate adapter and bit kit where you could sleeve that over the top, and then it gave you 10 additional drivers to work with. And then later you could get full bit kits and really extend your line, your capabilities quite a little bit. Well, let's bring in the PST, and then we'll kind of compare what they changed from the Kick and the PST. Kind of show you some areas where they improved it, some where I thought it was a little bit lacking. So one of the biggest improvements from the PST, which I have here, this is the original multi-tool, to the Kick, was the pliers. The overall plier size just got bigger and beefier. And you can really see that when you're looking at stuff like the wire cutters. The wire cutters on here are substantially longer while maintaining the same type of open, the regular plier real estate, if you will. And then the needle nose as well, all that pretty much stayed the same, but the plier footprint got bigger overall. It just made it a more robust and a better tool. Now, where the original PST did not have any kind of inserts like the Kick does, the Kick, like I said, made it a lot more ergonomic, because the original PST and the PST2 had a lot of hot spots. When you go to use the pliers, they were just uncomfortable to use if you had to put much force on them. Now, while these are not the most ergonomic still, the Zytel inserts did make a substantial difference in how you were able to grip onto these multi-tools. Now, let's, the knife blade was pretty much the same, and we'll look at, let me just fan out the tools on this side here. We'll just look at both sides. So, let me swing these open. The one tool that I disagreed with, and what I really did not like about what they did with the Kick, was the fact that they took the awl out. So while most of these tools are pretty much the same, except for this one is a 3/16 driver as opposed to an 1/8 inch driver, they do have an 1/8 inch driver on the other side. The knife blades were pretty much the same. The 1/4 inch drivers were pretty much the same. But in place of the lanyard ring, which was just a little tiny lanyard ring on the PST, they elected to put a much larger one that went where the main tools were, where I think they would have been much better off had they included this awl, or even a little bit more robust of an awl. Now, if we flip around to the other side, let me close these up real quick. And this is where we're going to see how the can opener really changed on this model. Let me set that aside. So the original can opener, while it was pretty decent, it wasn't nearly as strong as this one, and it did not include the wire strippers. Now they did give you, I said it was an 1/8 inch screwdriver. I apologize. It was a 1/16 inch screwdriver, a very small fine point screwdriver. The one thing that's missing on here that I would have liked to seen as well, but the reason they had to get rid of it was because they added this much beefier Phillips driver, was the file. The file on the original PST was actually a very, very good file. I was kind of sad to see it go when it came in, but this is not one of those tools that I carried. I went straight in to the Wave. I was actually looking for the Super Tool 300. So I kind of bypassed the Kick, Fuse, Blast series of tools, because I don't really gravitate towards that original style. I like the outside accessible tools, excuse me, of those other models. But the file was definitely disappointing that it wasn't in here. Now, the screwdriver capability, though, where you lost some of these other tools like the awl and like the file, you definitely increased your driver ability. So all these other drivers that are on here that are not on the Kick specifically, you gain back with the addition of BitKit. So you have that small driver right there. Now, while these may not be quite as robust as a stationary tool or a dedicated tool on the multi-tool, they definitely increased your capability for the Kick. So it did lose some things, but overall it was really an improvement over the original. Now, the Kick in some ways was kind of a step back because, as I showed there, it took away a little bit of the tooling that you got in the original PST, but in a lot of ways it was a major advancement over what they had originally started with, the original tool. So first and foremost was the pliers. The pliers, just a huge difference in the pliers, and the Zytel inserts, which made it a much more comfortable multi-tool to grip onto. Those were two big improvements. Now, one improvement that they added to it, which I was disappointed that they don't do this today still, is the fact that this particular specialized fastener that they have here that has a female thread there where you can add on a pocket clip. I think that would be fantastic in today's current rebar, which is basically the continuation of this style of multi-tool. If they had that in the rebar today, I think a lot of people would definitely be want to have that pocket clip that you could purchase separately for it. I was disappointed that they didn't continue that particular feature. Now, another big improvement, the two biggest improvements for the interior tools were obviously I guess the nail nicks on the other side here. The can opener combination that included the wire stripper and the ability to add on that accessory kit where you could add on additional bits. That made this a much more functional multi-tool. Now, if there's one tool that I would have liked to have seen them keep, it would probably have been the file. I probably could get away with not having an awl on a slim multi-tool like this, but I definitely would have preferred that they put the file back in there. It just would have worked better overall. Now, today's multi-tools, we see files and saws and just everything under the sun packed into these multi-tools. But back then, this was kind of the entry level to that Kick Fuse blast line. So it was really cheap. It was like $25 or something like that if memory serves. So it was not expensive to get your hands on, so you could really get into a quality multi-tool that really worked pretty well for very little money. But times have changed, and now we expect a lot more out of our multi-tools. But nevertheless, this is the Leatherman Kick. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next one.